And what I'm going to really cover here on this presentation is actually hooking up the product under test. Oh, one step. All right. Um,
Excuse me, Patrick. If you could be a little bit louder, I think it would help the recording quality.
okay. Is this better?
Not much.
All right. Um, I have from the spec here is the figures we have of the sample configurations for both block and file. Um, what I'm really wanting to point out here is when you're hooking up the power meter, you got to be able to measure the power of the product under test. Um, block, we had the load driver, which usually was just a server connected to the storage system, and maybe nothing in between. Now in the file configurations, we've got a network switch that may be there, load drivers, and data collection systems, which you don't want to measure the power under. So it's just a reminder here that when we're hooking up the power meter, that we measure the actual power of the product under test and not the whole solution under test. So we need to clearly define where the power measurement needs to be for the product under test when we're hooking up the power meter, as demonstrated with that Dharmatech already demonstrated. Just a reminder about storage systems, where the black box boundary is. Your whole system may be in a rack where you have your test system and your product under test. So you got to make sure, again, it's just all this is going to be a reminder, and it's going to be the same message in all these slides. Where's the black box boundary is that you're measuring the product under test that's going to your power meter. Most of the storage system solutions have redundancy power supplies, so make sure, and if it's in a rack, that you've got the power supplies that you want to measure in the right feed and the other equipment on the other feed. Sometimes the way they hook them up is that the one power supply might be on one feed and the other power supply be on the other feed for redundancy, but when we're doing the test, come forward. We want to make sure that we're measuring both power supplies. Storage systems may get very large. They may be multiple racks. So you want to actually have to do a clamp on and measure the mainline feed in. And to double check. The power should be close to what you're expecting. If you have extra switches in there or servers, you'll see that on the power measurement. Verify the power factor, total harmonic distortion, voltage close to the load. If the current transformer, make sure you have the correct phase and the settings on the power meter. 3-phase setup, double check, because it's 3 phases. And synchronize between the clock and power meter. And your load generator. Environmental monitoring, it's required by both Energy Star and our specification that you have a temperature sensor 50 millimeters in front of the primary outlet, reading every 10 seconds the durable media, an accuracy within a half a degree. This is 3.1 of our ML specification, matches the Energy Star now. And power meter resolutions, you have your requirements there listed out. If it's less than a watt, it's got to be within 0.01 watt. If it's greater than a watt, 100 watts, which is mostly where we're at, it's got to be within a watt, reading every 5 seconds. And it should be 1 second within the workload generator. And input power requirements, which was already covered in the previous talk, but it's here for extra if there's any other questions on what is needed. So it's a quick talk here, just to remind you that when you're hooking up the power meter, to make sure that you know what the product under test is and what the test equipment is. Especially when you start working with the file systems. I'm going to come back to here. Sorry, is that you're going to have those extra switches in there. The file systems may have a switch, may not have a switch. It's a little bit different than what usually the block systems used to be, where you just had the spinning disc and maybe a head in front of it. Now you're going to definitely have a head in front of the system if it's a file system, and switches behind it possibly that are part of the product under test. And then you may have a switch that you need to collect the data for SFlow agent that's not part of the product under test. Quick talk. Any questions?
This is Wayne. It's not a question, but just a statement that anyone that's not familiar with power meters, back in 2014, we ran a 3-hour dedicated workshop on that, and that material of how to work a power meter is on the 2014 training site with under SNIA Emerald.
Patrick, on one of your slides you had the temperature probe for the environmental monitoring needs to be 50 millimeters from the inlet port, is what it says on the slide, but you said outlet port when you were speaking to it.
If I did that, that was my mistake. I meant inlet.
Okay, it is inlet port. Okay.